Alright guys, we're back at PTS Fab and back with BoJangles. I'm gonna try to get this thing actually tuned out today for power, and then hopefully the next session is a track outing. But got it on the dyno, had a couple of issues that we needed to sort out. I think the cable wasn't adjusted correctly, so we were kind of just staying in one gear. I don't know if we were in second or first, but letting it cool down now, getting some transmission fluid in it too because it was a little bit low. And then we're gonna get right back to it. But you see all these fancy lights around here. That's because Nick and them are starting up their own YouTube channel. Did you guys create the channel yet?
Yeah.
What's it called?
I think we just have a PTS Fab.
Oh, it's PTS Fab. So search that on YouTube. We'll put the link to it in the description. So check that out. They're going to have probably some pretty nice quality. They got a bunch of cameras, some nice lighting. So yeah, it should be pretty cool. What are you guys gonna do? Just like track most of the projects that you're doing? Just make daily updates on what you're working on? Yeah. So it'll be like I guess like a vlog style, but at the same time, some nice production value. Sorry, I don't have that. So far, it's been pretty easy to keep cool. We were a little worried about it because when we first started it up and started kind of messing around with it a little bit, you know, the temp went up to, I don't know, it was showing about 170. Now keep in mind, we're not going off of the oil pressure or the oil temperature just yet. We're still just reading off that coolant sensor that's in the head, but it's not in any water, so we don't know, you know, if we can trust it or how much. But we're still basing what we're doing off of that reading, but we're understanding the fact that it's not completely accurate. So we're keeping it at a pretty low temp. Now, when we shut it off, we shut it down when the sensor was reading like 170. While we were while the motor was off, when we keyed back on a couple of minutes later, all that heat kind of propagated throughout the heads, and so it ended up reading about 210. Once we started it back up to adjust the throttle screw on there, temp did start creeping down a little bit once we had it on there. So that is the fuel actually cooling the engine. So I think that's what we're gonna be able to see. I don't know how much it actually would have pulled down if we kept it on. I don't know if at a certain temp, the amount of fuel that we're putting into it is gonna regulate the temp. This is all stuff that we're gonna find out now. You know, we're still pretty new to this fuel, so we're gonna, you know, be pretty cautious with it and take it step by step. But so far so good. As long as we can get it to shift normally on this next time that we start it up, we'll start kind of, you know, getting into some throttle, giving it higher RPM, seeing what it's going to do. Because the biggest thing that we're waiting to see is if when we give it some throttle or when we floor it, is this valve going to stay open and regulate the amount of boost that's going into it. So we got to see how much positive pressure we're actually going to build with this thing. As of right now, the duty cycle is set to 0. Boost control is basically off. So it should do the minimum amount of boost that we're going to be able to do with this setup. Now, if that minimum amount of boost is already too much, you know, once we start flooring it and actually getting up into decent RPM where this thing is supposed to be spitting out a whole boatload of air, you know, then we're gonna have an issue and we gotta figure out, do we actually need to gear this down and then boost control from there, or are we gonna actually be able to have this thing geared up as much as it is and control it with that one valve? So a lot of things that, you know, we're gonna see today. So yeah, let's get right to it. go to plan. You guys feel weird having 3 cameras pointed at you?
Well, now I do.
Not now, he's in the zone. Concentration. Got resting bitch face. Alright, so hopefully I'll have gotten some video of what we've done so far. I was busy actually trying to tune the damn thing, and so I didn't really get a whole lot of video. Hopefully I can get a clip from somebody and you guys can see that right here. But the couple of pulls that we did initially, we were just kind of easing into it, seeing what boost it was going to go up to. So we went higher and higher RPM, and it was going higher than we wanted it to go. So like we were pretty low and it was like 11 pounds, and then we gave it some more throttle and allowed it to go a little bit more RPM, and it was about 15, you know, then 17, and then finally we said, all right, feeling everything is close enough to do a pull. So we did one hit and we went up to only about 6,800 RPM, and it went up to about 25 PSI. Not really a huge deal, but a couple of problems happened. First, and probably not as bad of a problem, but the dyno didn't read, it didn't log. So we have no idea what power it actually made, and that's kind of our primary concern with this setup, is that we have to make sure that it doesn't make too much power for that engine. We know the blower can make all the power in the world, but we're trying to soften it, you know, take as much boost away as we can, take away some timing so that it doesn't make too much and hurt the motor. So, not knowing what it did on 25 pounds up to 6,800 and at 100% throttle is kind of a pain in the ass. But the other problem, and vastly more important, is on that pull, the reason why I let out at 6,800 was because it dove, well, what I saw during it, because I was looking at the air fuel, what I saw is that it went a little bit above what our target was. It wasn't crazy lean or anything like that. Like we were targeting probably 3.9, and it went up to about 4.3 or something like that. And so once I saw that number, I let out. And looking back at the log, what was happening was fuel pressure was dropping. This is a mechanical pump. There should be zero reason why fuel pressure would be dropping. So we knew we had an issue, and Nick's taking a look. That's what they're kind of running through right now. We're changing plugs now that we're gonna start getting into power. They're gonna put a set of 9s in, I believe, and he's changing the fuel filter. Turns out there was a boatload of junk in the fuel filter. Now this whole fuel system is from a different car. So whether it was from like sitting or it was, you know, just crap from the other car, we're hoping it was dirty enough to the point where that's why the fuel pressure was dropping. If that filter gets really clogged, that fuel pump's continuing to spin, and so it's going to start basically creating voids, and it's going to drop in fuel pressure because we're consuming more than can get through that filter. Not more than the pump can provide, more than can get through the filter. So pretty sure that's what was going on. The regulator looked fine, but we took that apart too just to make sure, and hopefully we slapped that filter back on, and hopefully it's able to go a smooth pull all the way through now. But if that fuel volume wasn't there because that filter was clogged, then it means pretty much everything that I've done so far is going to be off now. So what I'm expecting to see is that not changing any fuel values, doing that same exact pull, it's probably going to try to be a lot richer, and it's going to want to pull a bunch of fuel. Hopefully that is the case, because honestly our numbers were a little bit high in the fuel table. So, you know, we were thinking there was some kind of issue. I was thinking that it was just injector data was wrong, and so it was giving us, you know, a false table value. But turns out it was probably the fuel filter. So they're gonna clean that out, and we'll do another pull and see what it does. Hopefully it's smooth sailing from here. But we still have some rockiness, even if it pulls clean and has the fuel pressure that it needs, because we may make too much power on the current setup. All right, a familiar scene. They're gonna switch out the regulator because we're having a little bit of an issue here. So try to get it to where you can actually see this, but this light blue line here is fuel pressure. And if you'll see, it should be following the trend of the boost, which is the darker blue line. And once it gets up to a certain point, it makes a drastic separation from that, and then it gets really, really rocky. I mean, we're going up and down in pressure here. It's better on this one once they cleaned out the fuel filter, but we're still getting, I mean, that was 116 down to 100, so we're getting 16 PSI dips and fluctuations, and it's just low overall. It should be following the trend of that dark blue line. So this is a major issue. I mean, we've been brainstorming, trying to figure out what it actually may be. We're gonna swap out the regulator, see if something's wrong with it. I mean, when we took it apart and looked at the diaphragm, everything looked good, but I don't know, maybe there's something that we're just kind of missing here, and hopefully this fixes it. If not, then the only other thing to really point the finger at is the pump itself. All right, so we got good news and bad news. The bad news, actually, we have more good news than bad news. So the bad news is the fuel pressure still did the same thing on that last pull. The good news is it still made 1100 horsepower and 1200 torque. And the other good news is we got a giant bucket of freaking chicken nuggets to eat. This is probably the best news.
Definitely worth that.
So we're rigging up something right now to test if we can. So we're thinking maybe the return line on the fuel pressure regulator was too small. It was only a -8. And so when we're setting base fuel pressure with the regulator, we're thinking the pressure is actually coming from the line being too small. And so it's giving us a false setting on the regulator. So then once we start getting up into where the injectors are stealing fuel from the rail, the regulator is acting like it was a 20 PSI base fuel pressure or something like that, like way too low. And so it's starting to lose fuel volume at that point. So we're rigging up real quick. We set the base fuel pressure at 90 with the smaller line, and we put this big line on here to see if that pressure goes down. So we're not going to touch the screw on top. We're just going to put this bigger line on there, start it up, and if it's at a lower base fuel pressure, then we know that was the issue. If it's still at 90 PSI, then we got another problem somewhere else. Still hunting down the solution to the problem. Our little rig didn't work with the fuel thing, so we got the cap back on. Thankfully, because I didn't want to make a pull with duct tape as a fuel tank cap.
SFI tape.
Yeah. We took the fuel pump. Actually, so originally we had taken the fuel filter out to see if there was any debris on it, and there was a bunch of debris in it. We figured it was old, so cleaned it out. That wasn't the issue. We tried the return line thing. That wasn't the issue. And we were about to just take the fuel filter out completely and try it without one. But when we took it out, there was a shit ton of new debris in that filter housing. So we're thinking that the pump itself is eating itself alive. So I got a friend that's thinking about going and getting another pump while Nick takes this one apart to try to see if it's really torn up. It's got to be coming from somewhere. It's the only moving part in the system is that fuel pump. So clean system, cleaned out the filter, literally just maybe like 2 minutes of runtime, and it's got debris in it again. It's got to be the pump tearing itself apart for some reason. It is a used pump. It's not like it's brand new, so not out of the question. Oh, there's big chunks too. So that's what we got in there right now. That was after, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes of running. We cleaned that out, we cleaned the filter out. That's brand spanking new. So something is tearing itself apart. We're pretty sure it's that pump. Well, now it's broken.
See the rotors in there.
Wasn't there scrape? Wait, go back.
You can kind of see something.
Yeah, there's a lot of on the edges. I don't know what they're supposed to look like, unfortunately, though. So, but I see shiny where there's not shiny elsewhere. You know how to put that thing back together?
Yeah.
I only ask because I don't. So is it scraping up on the face right there?
Yeah, these aren't flat anymore. Feel the grooves on top?
Okay, so we fought this thing for a decent amount of time, just trying to rack our brains and come up with what was actually going on. What ended up finally being solidified as the issue, because we ended up working on this thing through the week. Nick tried a couple of different things. We were going back and forth in phone call and text, just trying to troubleshoot it. And what we finally realized was the pump was definitely tearing itself apart. When they got that other side, that other cover off, it was really obvious that it was tearing itself down. The other issue that we were having was the tank was a little bit too small. The size of the pump that we were using and height of the tank was actually a little bit too short. So the suction that it was creating was actually allowing the whirlpool to go all the way down to that bottom fitting, where it was actually taking the fuel and allowing it to suck in some air. On top of that, the return was putting so much fuel back into that small cell that it was just a bubbly, crazy mess in there because there wasn't any baffling. So Nick whipped up a taller tank and baffled the return, and they ended up getting a new pump. And I tell you what, I've never seen such a smooth fuel pressure curve after that. Didn't matter what we were doing with the injectors. The fuel pressure was rock freaking solid. And so yeah, I mean, it was in the fuel pump area, and we eventually troubleshot our way to that. But I never would have thought, I guess we're just not used to having this kind of a gnarly pump in our system, to where too much fuel entering back into the tank and not having enough fuel to actually pull from is an issue. That's a new one on us. So, you know, we're learning as we go, and that was a big one. So glad we got that solved though. So that's it for this one, guys, but check out a little clip of the next video when we got everything working perfectly and got to actually make some serious pulls. This thing is going to be a monster engine.